I got my hands on a Leica CL. You might have seen my previous video about the Leica Q2 and a few of the things that I would have changed to make it the perfect camera. Don't get me wrong, the Leica Q2 is a great camera. Very versatile. You could do everything from astrophotography to landscape photography to some portrait shoots. But for me, someone who takes pictures of people, I need a little more flexibility than what the Q2 offers in a lot of aspects. This little bad boy must have heard me coming. It addresses one of the main issues I had with that Leica Q2, namely that it's an interchangeable lens system camera. As you can see right now, I've got my 35mm on here, which, because this is an APS-C size sensor camera, is really more like a 50mm lens on a full frame camera like the M10 or the Leica Q2 if it were interchangeable lens system camera. However, there are a few things I would change about this camera to make it the perfect camera. Don't get me wrong, this camera is great as it is. That's not what I'm saying. I'm just saying that for me, there's a few things that would make the camera even better. First, the APS-C sensor. It's actually a great sensor, and I'll get into this more in a minute, but I would rather have a full frame sensor. I'm a full frame snob, what can I say? Speaking of the sensor, on Leica M10 cameras, the shutter comes down when you turn off the camera, so the sensor itself is protected. It doesn't do that on this camera, and so I'm always worried there's going to be some dust or particles on the sensor. I really wish that the shutter would come down when you turn the camera off. I think the Canon R series cameras do that as well. Just makes sense to me. I have to wonder if that's something that they could do with a firmware update. The second thing that I would bring up, I don't know if I would change it, is the Viewfinder. Don't get me wrong, this Viewfinder is actually quite beautiful. I would actually argue that it looks better than the Q2's Viewfinder. I know it has less resolution than the Q2, fewer pixels per million, yada yada, but to my eye, this one actually looks better than the Q2. However, I do sometimes miss that optical viewfinder experience you get with like a Leica M10. I think it would be cool if you could switch between the electronic viewfinder and some sort of optical viewfinder like you can on some of the Fuji cameras. The third thing I would change about this camera is the rear screen. Same thing with the Q2. Don't get me wrong, beautiful screen, still doesn't flip out, okay? Another thing I would change about this camera, just like the Leica Q2, is adding some ports. Like the Leica Q2, this camera has no ports. I don't quite understand why. The predecessor to this camera, or I guess the sibling to this camera, the Leica TL2, has a USB-C port. At least give us that, maybe a headphone jack too. Come on, Leica. This is still a digital camera. The next thing I would change about this camera is the same thing from the Leica Q2. I would love to see some in-body image stabilization. Again, you know, this is the kind of camera where the lens is probably not going to have stabilization, so it would be great to have something like that in the body. I think especially with the APS-C size sensor, if we must use an APS-C size sensor, there's plenty of room in the L mount here to fit some stabilization. They did it in the SL2 with a full frame. I don't see why they couldn't do this here. They could probably even do it with the full frame, because again, this is an L mount camera, which can take both full frame lenses and the smaller APS-C type lenses. The last thing I would change about the Leica CL is the lens lineup. The camera came with an 18mm kind of pancake lens as part of a package. And I also got my hands on the 23mm lens. Because it's an APS-C camera, the 18 is more like a 28mm. Wait, no, is that right? 927, yeah. Because the Leica CL is an APS-C camera, the 18mm lens is more like a 28mm, and the 23mm lens is more like a 35mm. Frankly, I wasn't really impressed with either one of these lenses. They both say they're made in Japan, so I tend to think they're really made by Panasonic because they look like Panasonic lenses. Very sharp, crisp, render nicely, the colors are good, but it just doesn't have that Leica look. So, whenever I'm going to use this Q2, it will have an adapter on it with made in Germany Leica glass on it, and man, does it look good. It looks very, very, very close to my Leica M10 and definitely has that Leica look, the sort of pop with the subject in the foreground and the background in the distance, and there really is some 3D-like separation, good micro contrast, excellent color rendition. So basically, I just wish they would make lenses like this that would fit on the L mount natively, maybe even with autofocus. Hey YouTube, this is Future Me. Another thing I would change about the Leica CL is adding weather sealing like the Leica Q2 has. So I hope you enjoyed this video. What do you think about the Leica CL? Would this fit your needs better than the Leica Q2? Could this be the perfect camera with some of the tweaks I suggested? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. And of course, as always, like, subscribe, all that good stuff, and we'll see you in the next one. See ya.